It's been a year, and yeah, a bit, since Ms. Marvel came out, and ever since then, I've not quite been able to figure out how I feel about the show. There's a lot to like, there's a fair bit to love, but as has often been the case with Marvel's Disney Plus catalog, there's also, I think, a peculiarity at the center of Ms. Marvel, one it's been impossible for me to look past. So join me for the next 40 minutes or so, and together we'll take a survey of this show from the vantage point of late 2023, asking the following questions. Was it good? What did it do well? What did it do badly? What is this peculiarity, and how does it hold up on rewatch? But just before we do, a quick word from this video's sponsor. Exter make these sleek, super slim wallets that cut out all the fat and keep your card safe in a high-quality, sustainably produced and RFID-protected package. They also make a bunch of other awesome accessories, like bags and these super handy solar-powered tracking cards. You'll never lose your wallet again, as well as a mini mag-safe wallet for your phone, really cool, and even a wallet version made to fit the Apple AirTag. I could keep listing products and adjectives, tell you about the money-back guarantee, all that, but you've heard a ton of pitches like that before, I'm sure, so I won't, and I'll just tell you this. Back in August, the last time I worked with Exter, I took the Parliament wallet in green and the aluminium card holder they sent me out for the day to get some ad footage, and I put my regular, trusty, functional wallet in the zip pocket of my backpack for afterwards. It's 3 months later, and guess where that old wallet is today? Viewer, it's still in that zip pocket. I've not used it once, and I've used the Parliament every day since. Believe the hype. There are sales on until the end of the year with up to 50% off, and you can use my code PILLAR or link below to take that up to 55%. So thanks to Exter, and now let's get to Ms. Marvel. We'll start with a vaguely chronological revisiting before diving into a few specific topics and considering where the show stands in 2023. Here we go. The show opens with a bang, I think. Episode 1 is the classic story of girl is fan, girl gets bangle, boy and girl break the rules to sneak off, girl discovers superpowers. It's charming, well-paced, and a great pitch for the show. Everything looks pristine, we get a pop-in soundtrack, the spin on the whole secret superpower discovery story we'll get over these 50 minutes or so comes across as wholly fresh by virtue of the tonal, psychological, and cultural uniqueness on display here, and Iman Vellani's enthusiasm for the role and the show comes through literally from line 1.
Finally, the moment everyone has been waiting for.
Elsewhere too is, actually, let's not move on so fast. Given how effortlessly and how successfully Vellani is able to embody Kamala right off the bat, it's easy, especially on rewatch, to take her performance for granted, but we really shouldn't. She's as good in her role as many of her more experienced counterparts elsewhere in the franchise, and better than many. It's true that a lot of the MCU's younger generation are very well cast, but none have had to shoulder a whole project in the way Vellani does here. Tom Holland was able to ease his Spidey into a leading role through Civil War and his team-up heavy trilogy, and Hailee Steinfeld's Kate shares the billing with franchise and industry veteran Jeremy Renner during her introduction, not to mention that at this point, Steinfeld's practically a leading woman herself. Vellani's task here is far harder. With no familiar points of reference to carry over investment or viewer goodwill, she must not only introduce us to, capture us with, a new hero, she's also got to anchor a whole show. A reminder, she was an 18-year-old newcomer to showbiz when filming began, and she accomplished all the above and then some. The one constant in responses to this show is praise heaped upon Vellani's performance, and just think about that. Think about the fact that the story, the effects, the production of this show was the result of probably thousands of cumulative years in the industry, and the thing that stands head and shoulders above all that is, in the words of The Hollywood Reporter's Angie Han, Vellani's youthful verve and irresistible moxie. That is massively impressive. This, of course, isn't to denigrate any of the rest of that stuff. The other parts of this show are often great too, and that quality also comes through early on. We don't spend a ton of time with Kamala's friends or extended family throughout. There are only 6 episodes, half of which take Kamala elsewhere, but when we do hang out with the extended cast, it's good. Everyone is well characterized, especially her parents. I finished my rewatch convinced that Muniba and Yusuf, the protective mother and the softy father, are quietly the show's MVPs, or EVPs, I guess, after Kamala, but the point stands. They're great parents, sometimes a little over-stern, sometimes a little clueless, but always, even when annoyed or angry, overflowing with love for their daughter, even if she and we don't see that love on the surface right away. It's not all plain sailing, Ms. Marvel's family vision is far too true for that, but even with moments like that Hulk scene in which we initially sympathize with Kamala, the effort these two put into meeting their kid, their teen kid whose interests and obsessions they're still trying to wrap their heads around halfway, is beautiful. Bits like this, and the episode 3-4 grounding wrinkle Kamala's home life, but those wrinkles are ironed out wonderfully by the show's close. We do see less of Amir and Taisha, they are casualties of the episode count alongside Nakia, but even these more minor roles add a lot to the grain of the show. Bruno is a prince. Matt Lintz adds warmth and vulnerability to a role that could have come off one note in lesser hands, and the evident care and attention paid to the bit players gives Kamala's local community a pleasantly active, grounding presence in the landscape of the show. I'm also very fond of the time we spend looking into Kamala's school and social life. For the first couple of episodes, the stakes for Kamala's navigation of school life are precisely what they are for every adolescent: popularity, love, embarrassment, and their future. And that's plenty high enough. In moments like Kamala's talk with the guidance counselor,
junior year, it's time to start really thinking about your future. I mean, college admissions are coming up. Before you know it, it's SATs, it's essays, it's applications.
Do I have to figure out my whole future before lunch, or is there like...
I'm reminded, oddly, of an episode of Modern Family. Season 5, episode 12, Under Pressure, sees Mum Claire attend an open house. British viewers think parents' evening at her overachiever daughter Alex's school, only to be overwhelmed by how tricky being in school actually is. It's been a few years since I've been in a high school or even a sixth form, but I still remember the shot of catharsis I got seeing Claire struggling to point out just how impossible the study, revision, homework timetables given to students are to follow.
So, as a rule, I only give 2 hours of homework a night.
2 hours?
Nothing they can't handle.
No, I'm sure they can. It's just that if they have 2 hours in this class and they have an hour for AP Bio, advanced lit, and hang on one second, let me just, and then another hour and a half for AP History, 6.
And seeing her realize the burden all this places on young people.
Honey, I was just you for 2 hours. I could barely hold it together. I don't know how you don't have a meltdown every day.
Ms. Marvel certainly doesn't pursue this angle to anywhere near the extent that episode of Modern Family did, but in some minor sense, it is here, an empathy for the pressures of school and the teenage worldview that you certainly don't always see, and I appreciate it. Beyond this, the rest of this part of Ms. Marvel cuts through to reality in a similar way. Character dynamics like those with Zoe or the Bruno Kamran stuff that had the potential to be your standard, hackneyed, popular nerd archenemy thing feel far more real, and therefore allow the viewer to better inhabit Kamala's little corner of Jersey City. This principle holds across the rest of the teen life, school-focused episodes, particularly the flirting and the party we see in episode 2. While it's all still clearly dialogue, it does capture the way teenagers, talk, at least like 30% better than is the norm. Capturing the ways of teenagers, though, that's quite a vague thing to praise. We can get into specifics. One of my favourite things here is the way the show's visual style allows us to inhabit Kamala's perspective, the way that cartoonified or otherwise warped background details come to life, rearranged to convey emotion or a particular psychological state, the way interiority is externalized. Ms. Marvel isn't the first show to do something like this, of course, but it looks and fits great here. These moments were apparently inspired by the vibrancy of the Ms. Marvel comic books, as well as Into the Spider-Verse, and you can tell. I'm gonna move on now, but I did do a video about this phenomenon when the show was airing, so if you want a bit more depth on it, that's linked below. What else? Oh right, the superhero stuff. If you're thinking it's odd we're only now getting to it, well, that's because, initially at least, it is less a superhero show than a show about a superfan getting powers. That does change, the identity, the drama, the helping people, all this picks up throughout episode 2, and what we get is good. The power testing montage and the kid-saving sequence really start to sell you on Ms. Marvel or Nightlight as a new hero worth rooting for. The kind of sour ending and tension created by the looming net of damage control start you inching toward the edge of your seat. But all this tails off pretty sharply in episode 3. It appears that taste of danger has convinced Kamala, for the time being at least, that superheroing isn't the best idea, and the show follows her here, dropping the Nightlight stuff for a focus on family history. We learn Kamala's descended via her great-gran from an extra-dimensional species of Jinn, or species called Jinn, and we meet the rest of that squad, the so-called clandestines from the Noor dimension. That's a lot, but there is fun to be had in this wider family focus. Again, the Khans are one of the best bits here, so instead of dragging, a sequence like Amir's wedding emerges as a highlight. It is curious that the MCU thing most entranced by superheroing pulls away from it so soon and dives back into the classic personal familial power-aided struggle template that's been the franchise's bread and butter, and the episode does get dragged down with the gatecrashing of the vaguely designed, vaguely written clandestines.
You weren't going to tell me.
I was gonna tell you, she just needs some more time.
We don't have more time.
Oh, you've got no time? Why? That being said, it is rewarding seeing Kamala's powers develop. Every time a situation develops and she has to create constructs or throw hands, literally, she's visibly getting more skilled, and we get the next stage of that here. But that being said, the editing, especially with the damage control intervention, discombobulates a little. They kind of appear out of nowhere. It's strange. And then something even stranger happens. Episode 4 rolls around. In episode 4, we move away from many locations, plot points, and characters we'd become familiar with for the next 2 episodes and head over to Karachi. Previously dormant plot threads, which had cohabited with stuff like the damage control setup, burst into the foreground, and so episodes 4 and 5 are taken over by a laser focus on the Jinn, the Noor, and the Veil Between Worlds. Remember when I said episode 1 was a great pitch for the show? It seems like not all of these episodes got that memo. Episodes 4 and 5, and to some degree 3 too, feel like a different show, or a different draft of this show, one where Kamala becomes Ms. Marvel through doing an Ancestry.com deep dive instead of through interning as Nightlight, hero of Jersey City, one where the Red Daggers and the Rich Cousins take the place of Bruno, Nakia, and the Khans, one about fighting extra-dimensional threats in the Karachi underworld. And this new version of the show is fine. Everything still looks great, this world is brought to life with the same vibrancy Jersey is, and it's always nice to see scenes in Pakistan without Hollywood's standard Middle East visual filter. The train station fight in particular is a highlight. Kamala's really starting to come into her own, and that ease comes across. It's colourful, kinetic. But beyond these elements, this side of the show just feels a bit thinner. The melee at this episode's close is a better directed one than that clandestine's wedding crash, but despite this, the sequence is less involving, because the characters being attacked, the Red Daggers, are sketches. The clandestines are barely more. Same with the Rich Cousins. The word, I think, for the family Karachi getaway side of Ms. Marvel is undercooked. The heavy exposition dump midway through the 4th episode would have been a lot more rewarding if we'd been wondering about any of these questions for more than one episode. Najma's very serpentine arc, that vague, never-explained time pressure, even what she ends up doing and how she does it, this feels like a first draft. It's fine if there isn't any time pressure, if she was just saying this to sound more reasonable to her followers, but, if so, give us an indication that this is the case. None of this really has room to breathe, and that means that even the good parts feel sort of rushed. I do think it's a little odd how so many of the people Kamala talks to in Karachi just speak unbidden about the historical, psychological after effects of partition.
I had no idea you could draw. We lost so much during partition. And I thought the only way I can hold on to what we had lost was to create it myself.
Don't get me wrong, talking about, highlighting in the show, this hugely significant cultural rupture so many Westerners are utterly clueless about, I'm not remotely against this. The show wants to get all this across to Kamala and to us, but it doesn't have much time to do that in, so the result is that minor characters like Nani have this very non-naturalistic, almost video gamey habit of disclosing very specific information that happens to be relevant to our protagonist's journey, apropos of nothing, and non-naturalism is fine, but it does jar with the naturalism we discussed a moment ago in those Jersey segments. So this side of the show is a mixed bag, a prime example of the way higher stakes don't mean higher quality, but it's certainly not unenjoyable, especially episode 5. Episode 5 is great. Hassan and Aisha's story more than holds its own. The picture of 40s era India it gives us is gorgeously realized and palpably torn. Sure, a lot of that torsion is subtextual, it only glances off the real complexity of the history here, but it's a segment in a Marvel miniseries. What do you want from it? Ms. Marvel's able to use an MCU-sized budget to put a genuinely painful partition story in front of millions of viewers, even if it is necessarily an aside rather than the main event. Brief doesn't mean shallow. though. Episode director Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy has since spoken about the meticulous photo referencing that went into the platform sequence to get it as accurate, as chaotic, as real as possible. So yeah, episode 5 is great. But one wonders if that greatness does come a little at the expense of the rest of the show's identity. As we've discussed, and as we'll continue to discuss, Ms. Marvel never quite cohered, and the choice to dedicate this much time to another story in another setting, however rich that story is, well, it might have been a double-edged sword, but forgetting that for a moment, episode 5 is great. The greatness is mostly for the first half or so, the wrap-up suffers from some of the same undercookedness, but the character stuff near the end, between these 3 generations of women, manages to shake that thinness off. But after this, after the secret's out, after the Trail of Stars loop is closed and the primary antagonist is defeated, another funny thing happens. The show doesn't end. No, for the close, for a whole nother episode, we're back to Jersey. The final boss is now Damage Control, and then Kamran, and then Damage Control again. Yeah, there's a lot to pull together here. Episode 6 does have to reckon with the slightly messy zigzagging between identities we've seen in the show so far, and at times, the exertion shows. A moment like this...
I mean, believe me, we are all in awe of you. But Beta, I just want to be sure that you're being careful out there. Just because you can do all these amazing things doesn't mean that you actually volunteer to go looking for trouble, right?
Abu, I don't think you raised me to sit by and do nothing when I can help people.
And we trust her, right?
Only really works in the way it wants to if you imagine you've watched a different, more comics-based, more Ms. Marvel, less clandestine's Red Dagger show. Remember, as it stands, the only helping people these guys know about is the semi-botched mosque rescue, after which Kamala decided to stop. But I think Vellani and co are giving enough that you're able to mentally paper over the cracks. You're able to take this moment how it wants to be taken, and it's really good. That's the thing, that's the weird thing. Despite the slightly disadvantageous position it's placed in, episode 6 gets it done. There's a lot to pull together, but that pulling together does get done, and we end up with a banger of a finale. Part of that's the payoff we do get for the show's meandering arcs, but part is that there's just a lot of good smaller moments. Zoe's only been a minor presence so far on the show, but her influencer play here really makes up for it. It's a cool moment, and a necessary one, to set up the climax's evocative community versus cop standoff. Kamala's traversal sequence, her school plot montage are dynamite, make you wish for a whole season's worth of this side of the show. A full 6 or more episode run with this gang pulling off capers, helping people, and outsmarting Damage Control. The whole sudden Kamran force field bit is a weak spot, even we don't really know what's happening, why, or what the stakes are. As a result, Damage Control's position seems a bit more reasonable than I imagine it's supposed to, and it kinda skybeams the personal social elements out of focus.
They're never going to accept me, and they'll never accept you either!
But that's only one part of the climax, and it is made up for. The superhero community spirit of this climax is the most earned, I think, since that of Raimi's New York. And all in all, especially when we've cleared those quietly brilliant moments of emotional resonance toward the very end, the result is, low-key accepted, maybe the best finale we've seen from Marvel's Disney Plus projects. I don't know, you'll have to let me know if that's a hot take down below. Those are the episodes then, and at this point you've probably got an idea of what I think the peculiar part is here, but just to delay that gratification a little further, I feel it's worth giving my thoughts on something else about the show that was mildly controversial at time of release, and why I'm not highlighting this as the problem some others did, and that is the handling of the religio-cultural side of things. You will have to take this section with the usual white guy grain of salt, but as far as I can tell, the Ms. Marvel team seems to have succeeded in balancing the culture and faith being depicted here with the show's mass market, narrative, and format demands. The show did of course make use of cultural advisors, and so much of the show's identity, from character traits to memorable lines and central emotional or thematic moments, are steeped in Kamala's Muslim American cultural trappings in a way that comes across as layered, authentic, and respectful.
Shot him all over the
You
face.
saved lives.
Balconies aren't even safe.
And if you saved one life, well, you saved the world.
The main caveat to all that, though, is the jinn stuff. I remember that made a bit of a buzz on release. See, within Islamic law, jinn are real, typically. Religion is complicated. But you're not supposed to, worship or draw power from them. And Kamala's hard-light stuff, kinda sorta coming from jinn ancestry, was taken by some viewers as pretty close to that kind of idolatry. And some found the idea of descent from Jinn itself just not great. You can see why, right? You know the whole "them Murdoch boys have got the devil in them" idea from Daredevil? Imagine if in the Netflix adaptation that hadn't been a metaphor. Imagine how some of the staunch Catholic Daredevil fans would have reacted. They probably wouldn't have loved it either. Anyway, that's one side of this, and it's the side you get highlighted if you Google Ms. Marvel Jinn controversy. But there is another side, it seems. While Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, remember her, didn't write or direct episode 3, the one where the Jinn link is made, she directed the next two, and she spoke to this mixed response, saying, "I think Jinn is a word that's loosely thrown around in South Asia, and I think we, in telling that story, we wanted to open up the fact that anyone who is different or anyone who has powers that come from, unexplained sources, could be mistaken for Jinn." Jinn, or genies, if you're into that kind of anglicization, do feature in folklore and scripture beyond the Islamic, and in Islamic scripture they're not so much demons as, well, it's a whole thing, but they're certainly not demonic in the sense that word's used in Christian and post-Christian culture. And if a director with an Asian background is telling me that today, throughout the region, the idea of the Jinn is used a lot more widely, then who on earth am I to doubt her? The situation, as it appears to me then, is that the Ms. Marvel writers used a concept that rubbed some more traditional or more religious viewers the wrong way, but that it probably isn't the clear-cut case of cultural vandalism it's framed as in the glut of mid-2022 articles from historically clickbaity platforms that followed episode 3. Either way though, maybe another backstory for Kamala or the clandestines would have been a better choice, since compared to the inherently fraught ethno-religious territory a character like Moon Knight's Mark Spector treads on, there really was nothing stopping Ms. Marvel from just sidestepping this whole thing. Jinn aside though, I think we can praise Ms. Marvel for its channeling and deployment of the Muslim American experience, and through elements like Nakia's journey to the mosque board, we can see a respectful and responsible probing of the lines between tradition and progress that feels very in line with the spirit of the source material. And there is one thing in particular I'd like to highlight as a very cool move, and it's to do with Kamala's relationship with her mother. Muniba is very protective of Kamala, perhaps overprotective, but despite the impression you might get from the way she grounds her discomfort with stuff like the AvengerCon trip in phrases like haram, this isn't a cultural or religious thing so much as it is a kind of family trauma thing.
Muniba's mother, Sana, was just a toddler then. She got separated from her parents on the train station.
One thing I think a lot of viewers from more traditional backgrounds connected to, whether that background be Islamic, religious more widely, or anything else, was the struggle Kamala felt between going out, doing perhaps disapproved of stuff, and the expectations or restrictions set by that background or by the family. The curfews, the compromises, the feeling of FOMO, it's all there in that first episode, and it's all quite evocative, but it's kept as subtext, and that's a great move. People who come from more traditional backgrounds, who felt these things because of this religion or that custom, can engage with that subtext if they want, but keeping that on an optional, metaphorical level means Muniba's journey toward acceptance stays accessible and inoffensive to all parties. I'm also rather fond of the role Sheikh Abdullah plays as a moral center for the Jersey community.
Remember, just because someone treats you as their enemy doesn't give you the right to treat them as yours. Good. It's not a thing you are, Kamala. It is a thing you do.
He doesn't get a ton of screen time, but he ends up having an outsized impact on the feel and texture of the show, with his frustrated yet still amiable presence in moments like the IDs please scene in episode 6, grounding Ms. Marvel's sense of knowing sympathy to the mundane processes of dehumanization, all too familiar to minority groups.
I'm gonna need to see everybody's IDs. That was
Not our first rodeo, Miss Agent.
So if that's not my issue with the show, then what is? Well, maybe we should use a comparison. An American woman from an immigrant family who discovers special powers, uses them to help someone in her East Coast big city community before diving into her family's past, discovering the roots of present-day problems in past trauma, literally traveling back in time to interfere. Doesn't that feel like another show too? Russian Doll was a Netflix original created by Leslie Headland, Amy Poehler, and Natasha Lyonne, starring the latter alongside Charlie Barnett, whose first season premiered back in 2019. Without getting too spoilery, it's kind of a darker, modern-day Groundhog Day thing.
Nobody locks us up.
Saying that doesn't do it justice. Russian Doll is stylish and raw and funny and beautiful. It ends up absolutely stepping out of the shadow of its time loop predecessors. But that is the elevator pitch. Well, it's the elevator pitch for Season 1. Season 2 did something else. Season 2 deep sixes the strange power discovery and utilization within characterful local community stuff in order to dive into its characters via a rediscovery of and traveling to the lives of their ancestors. Sound familiar? So yeah, Russian Doll Season 2 throws out that very compelling pitch that first episode had made years before, loses the Groundhog Day shtick and the laser focus on the Big Apple. This time, the hook is a looser one, trains that take you to your family's past. And between what we see of main characters Nadia and Alan, this conceit covers Reagan-era New York, 60s Berlin, and World War II Budapest. Nadia's mostly in the body of her mum, but Alan's in the body of his grandma, so, there's a lot to dig into. And dig into it we do. The second season uses these sci-fi touches to explore more grounded emotional issues deftly, per Rolling Stone, whose review continues, "The time travel functions as a metaphor for, among other things, the mental illness that runs through Nadia's family, and her fear that she could have inherited Nora's schizophrenia. Much of the show's comedy works as a release valve for the many problems Nadia is reluctant to face about herself, and the new episodes repeatedly confront her with that darkness in powerful ways." Den of Geek notes that while Season 2's approach to time travel doesn't provide the same manic energy as Season 1's time loops, the more conventional timey-wiminess opens Russian Doll up to a whole new world of emotional resonance. It's only by placing Nadia in the past that Russian Doll can reveal to us how much she is stuck in it. Don't get it twisted. In a lot of ways, Russian Doll's first season is the superior volume. It raises fewer questions, but answers them all more clearly. The problem and its stakes are more clearly defined. There's just a lot more momentum. But the very broad strokes of Season 2, the outline, what it's trying to do, the roots-seeking generational trauma therapy as character study, works conceptually, and works well, in a way the middle stretch of Ms. Marvel doesn't, not quite. The weaknesses of Season 2 aren't the result of the idea of this Season 2. Russian Doll's ancestry focus feels like the natural next step for both these characters and the show they're on. And that's because, well, this was Season 2. What I mean by that is both the having a whole season for the establishing story, the introduction, the figuring out in the more confined setting, and then having a whole season for the oppression, history, soul-searching thing, lets each version of Russian Doll breathe and not step on the other's toes. And also that just generally, I think character deep dives by way of time-skippy family trauma studies work better if they come after we've seen a good chunk of that character. To be clear, I'm not saying that any story which focuses on things like these right off the bat has made a poor choice. Something like Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things would instantly disprove such a claim, just that the use of a method like this to tell us more about our characters, where the family past isn't the focus but a focus, is used to ground them in their environment, their history, feels like a better choice if it comes after their introduction, after the time loop's closed, after Nightlight has become Ms. Marvel. If we have a picture of who a person is, what their story is, we have a point of reference to hold a familial history and whatever intergenerational psychological scars it leaves up against. The same principle, on a smaller scale, explains why flashback episodes tend to come toward a show's end, and why The Godfather Part 2 wasn't The Godfather Part 1. Thinking about this, thinking about Russian Doll, thinking about Ms. Marvel's odd split focus, a thought occurs. The 6 episodes of Ms. Marvel we got feel a lot like Ms. Marvel Season 1 and Ms. Marvel Season 2 smashed into one. Once this thought occurs to you, it's impossible not to see. That partition dialogue weirdness, with a full season's worth of time for that information to come up, it could have done just this, come up organically. The 3 love interests and 2 primary antagonists the show juggles with varying levels of success are divided fairly cleanly between Jersey Nightlight and Karachi Noor storylines. You can even spot points where the join seems flimsy. Take this scene in episode 3.
I think I have this bangle for a reason. Obviously, I can't be the superhero.
Maybe this is something I need to do. Something good.
I got into Caltech.
What?
As Bruno, 2 episodes after we'd met him, tries to tell her he's going to California, Kamala gestures at a rejection of her powers. She can't be the superhero. Instead, she needs to focus on her family, finding out who they are and how she fits into all that. But at this point, the only heroing she's done is saving that kid from the tower. Doesn't this moment feel like a Season 2, Episode 1 kind of beat, Spider-Man 2 style? Like something that had happened after a more established Kamala, a Ms. Marvel who had proven herself, who we'd seen prove herself in a full story alongside Bruno, had faced a new and seemingly unconquerable threat? Like Kamala's work in Karachi with the Red Daggers and in the time jump, the regained sense of confidence and sense of self that followed could provide an effective season-long arc, a push to reclaim that mask? To be clear, my point isn't so much that I think at one point there was a 2-season plan that got smushed down, although saying that, I wouldn't be at all surprised if what we got was the result of fusing 2 different pitches together. It's that regardless of how development went, the seeds are there in the season we got for what, in a conventional non-Disney Plus, non-MCU development environment, could have furnished 2 seasons, and furnished them really well. My point is that the idea of the multi-season format provides a useful model for approaching the way Ms. Marvel, especially in the mid-season, never fully coheres, and that considering an example like Russian Doll of a kinda similar show that managed to better organize some of the same thematic impulses can help the semi-befuddled Ms. Marvel viewer understand why they might feel some reservations about such a likable project. All this does prompt the next question though, doesn't it? Why? Why is the show like this? So split and overstuffed that imagining it as 2 seasons smushed together is a helpful exercise? Is it because this came out in the height of Marvel's quantity focus, their period of developing lots of one-off shows? Did they shove 2 seasons worth of ideas into 6 episodes because they didn't think a season 2 was a possibility? Or was it because 2 seasons would take too long? Did the Marvel machinery want Kamala to become a local hero and an interdimensional veil-protecting bangle technician all at once, to speedrun the early part of her journey, to get her crossover ready as soon as possible? Those seem to me the most likely options, and either way it's a shame. Either way, as much as I do like the show, I can't help but wonder how this material would have looked, fleshed out and split across 2 seasons. But if I were a betting man, I'd probably be leaning toward that latter option, and that's interesting, because there is an irony here. Something else I discussed on this channel, albeit briefly, back when the show was first releasing, was this idea Ms. Marvel gives us of an MCU in-universe fandom that we hadn't really seen before. The show never did anything mega noteworthy with this idea. I think taken together with She-Hulk, it's best understood as a sign of a wider trend away from groundedness toward fantasy, but there is, of course, what it adds to Kamala. Her story becomes one of a superhero superfan, the resulting sense of viewer insert fantasy, of fourth wall tapping, the way the MCU is able to consider and evaluate itself in the text. Again, these aren't angles that get fleshed out a whole bunch, but they do add a fun flavor to the proceedings, and a new dimension to her suiting up at the end. She's not just gained powers, she almost seems to have broken through the fourth wall, jumped from a real life to a fantastic one in the way every Marvel fan has wished for at one time or another. Consider this emancipation from the realistic, the expected, together with that above religio-cultural minority angle, and you've got the beginnings of an interesting train of thought. A benefit of a shared universe, a benefit of the MCU, is that the world persists long enough that self-mythologizing like this feels earned, that eventually you get to a point where you can tell a story like this. The irony is that, well, the shared universe doesn't stop there. A story like Ms. Marvel could only exist in an MCU, but because of this, the more limiting corollaries of MCU integration apply to it too. And that means Ms. Marvel was born unable to focus on itself, born with one eye looking forward, born with one purpose being to function itself as setup, as franchise fodder, as the next link in that ongoing chain of content. To a greater or lesser extent, this, like everything else since Phase 1, was compromised before filming ever began. How many of the often questioned choices in Ms. Marvel are explained by this? What if that power change wasn't primarily because of stretch effects or to better differentiate Kamala from other heroes? What if it was always for the purpose of easier Captain Marvel connectivity, the dimension-y veil end-of-the-world story that leaps out midway through that helped set up the Marvels, the way that high-stakes storyline gives Kamala a battlefield promotion from local hero to world saver, in a sense qualifying Kamala for the big leagues? Looking at this overstuffing, it's hard not to wonder if the demands of the shared universe are worth it. If even an ostensibly standalone project like Ms. Marvel, one with no returning characters, is kneecapped by the connectivity imperative, can't stand alone, if something like this can't reap the rewards of the format, what can? When can we start getting stories that are just stories? When do we get to the payoff? That is, more or less, what I was planning to write in this section, in the outline of this retrospective I set out a while back. But I can't really stick with it in a post-The Marvels world, can I? When do we get to the payoff? Well, we just did, and it was great. Even most of the more negative reviews agreed that getting to see Vellani in a team-up, seeing Kamala meet and measure up to her hero, was a very enjoyable experience. Here is the payoff, and it was really good. That changes things, but not totally. Sure, the steps we took to get Kamala into the Marvels resulted in a very fun team-up, but on rewatch, the Ms. Marvel show remains more than a little messy. So at present, it looks like the choice is either payoff, or properly paced, properly spaced, properly cooked through standalones. But maybe not both. And as much as I have enjoyed most of phases 4 and 5, maybe that being the choice is a sign that the process needs a shake-up. But that's obviously a position I've only reached now, after the Marvels, 1 and a bit years on. Things often look different in hindsight, and that's true for more of Ms. Marvel than its points of MCU connection. How do other areas of the show look in retrospect? Well, I suppose the power change is the big one. That caused a stir, but general opinions on this haven't really changed, and there's been no real reason for them to have. If you disliked it back then, felt it stripped Kamala's story of potential, made her more generic visually, you probably feel the same way now. And if you weren't attached to the comic style and beginning, on watching the Marvels or re-watching this show, you've probably forgotten there was a change, that there was a controversy at all. It's not a bad change particularly, but there's not much good about it either. Less potential for explorations of self-image, more stylistic dovetailing with her new twinsies, swings and roundabouts. Relatedly, the switch from Inhuman to Mutant was met with many raised eyebrows, but I think this one was a dub. Kamala was only ever a Terrigen baby in the comics because of behind-the-scenes rights politics anyway, and given that we'll be seeing a lot more mutants and probably no Inhumans, except for Daisy, please, I beg, over the next few years, I think placing Kamala in this front and center position is a move rich with potential. A potential the show seems aware of.
Whatever it is, it's just gonna be another label.
The mutation/power origin mystery is threaded throughout these episodes quite nicely. On rewatch, you can see the reveal being teed up as early as episode 2, but that being said, perhaps as a result of that split identity I waffled about above, the mutation stuff doesn't really fit in great with the Jinn-Noor stuff. As I understand it, the answer the show eventually goes with is that Kamala is able to create hardlight because she has an innate link to the energy of her ancestral Noor dimension, a link jump-started by the bangle she finds, not generated by it. A similar jumpstart is given to Kamran by Najma later on in the show, and what these jumpstarts actually are is triggerings of dormant X genes, because Kamala, and presumably Kamran too, they're mutants. This mutation is maybe influenced by having been born outside the Noor dimension, but maybe not, since only Kamala and Kamran end up getting the hardlight powers, none of the other can't. Or maybe all Noor dimension descendants hold some type of hardlight power potential within them, but this potential only happened to be unlocked by some unrelated but very convenient mutations in Kamala and Kamran. That is, maybe the mutation these characters have isn't straightforwardly a hardlight generation X gene, but a check for and facilitate usage of other hidden powers within genetic code X gene. And if that's got you confused, yeah, that's kind of my point. This has only got less clear in the time since airing. We learn in the Marvels, spoiler for the Marvels, that the bangle is a quantum band, with wormhole, dimension, crossy energy powers, but nothing to do with the Nor specifically. So the fact that it has the same effect on Kamala that Najma's Nor magicking does on Kamran is a slight head-scratcher. But at this point we're splitting some fairly unimportant hairs, so let's move on. One detail of the show's reception, which seems to have slipped from our collective memory, is the pre-launch review bombing. Ms. Marvel's IMDb page started out looking like this. Especially given the way the show's start is one of its stronger points, the motives behind that immediate 1-star push have become clearer than ever. It's even become clear that this wasn't deserved to the types behind it. Ms. Marvel's IMDb ratings are rarely, if ever, brought up as evidence for MCU woke, bad, anti-fan griftosphere arguments the way, say, She-Hulk still are, and the pre-launch negativity campaign for the Marvels focused lots on Brie Larson and comparatively little on Vellani. Part of that might be the Jupiter-like pull Larson exerts on anti-woke morons. They simply cannot help themselves from being weird little creeps with her, to the point that any co-star would get off lightly, but another part is definitely the hard-to-ignore mismatch between this show's start and the scores that start was getting. Another thing that's become apparent is the way Marvel seems to have figured out mid-pandemic shooting by Ms. Marvel's November 2020 shoot date, or at least by the time of reshoots months later. Apparently the cast and crew were split up into 3 sections, so infections didn't necessarily mean the whole process had to come to a halt. There are plenty of crowd scenes here and no Flash Thompson moments, to the point that on rewatch, thoughts of Plague and Zoom pub quizzes never even crossed my mind. It's likely the pandemic did have an effect on the show, of course, maybe even a negative one, but unlike some other 2022 releases, it never really shows in front of the camera. And the last thing we gain from considering Ms. Marvel 1 year on is the knowledge that despite everything, despite the messiness, the setup, the controversies, it seems to have resonated with viewers in a way relatively few of these Disney Plus releases have. In 2023, it regularly turns up toward the top of people's MCU show rankings, seeming to have had more staying power than even early favorites like WandaVision. Why is that? Who knows? Maybe it's to do with Ms. Marvel having a stronger finale. The messiness here is midway through, so you can leave the show and remember it on a high. Maybe it's to do with the fact that with Ms. Marvel, with her role in that lately released team-up flick, we have the first and biggest Disney Plus big screen payoff since Multiverse of Madness, and that we've had nearly a whole year sitting with the trailer to know that was coming. And maybe it's just because Vellani, the main common thread here, is just that good, that her performance and her presence has left an outsized mark on this franchise and this fandom, one that's still paying ever greater dividends a year later. Again, if I were a betting man, that last point's probably where my money'd go. When Ms. Marvel wrapped up back in 2022, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Satisfaction and discombobulation had gone hand in hand for my viewing experience, but I think the reason I'm still fond of it now, in a way I'm not of some other MCU Disney Plus efforts, is that yes, parts feel undercooked. Yes, taken as a whole, it can feel unfocused. Yes, sometimes the show feels like 2 shows smushed together, but it more or less comes together in the end, with enough heart, with enough love for these characters and respect for its source material that this wideness, this scattershot character, begins to seem less like, I don't know, poor workmanship, and more like a show with too many ideas. Too much to give, held back by the miniseries fixation Marvel's Disney Plus wing kicked the decade off with. And that makes it a lot harder to dislike. So in the end, Ms. Marvel is scrappy. Ms. Marvel has more a daydream than a focused vision. Ms. Marvel wins you over. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button like your Kamala in the finale, and I hope you enjoyed. Oh, and just because I've had a few people ask me this, I've not made the Marvels video yet. That isn't because I didn't like it, I did, and it's not because it's had a mixed reception or anything like that. No, it's the same reason I've not made a video on the second seasons of Loki or Invincible yet, or on the majority of the other stuff I've watched recently, and that is, barring retrospective videos like this one, I'll only really make a video on a topic if I feel I have something original-ish to say, a specific reading to give, or an idea or thesis to argue for, and I don't really have anything like that to give you for the Marvels. I did have the thought while watching it that one could make an interesting video essay about the way the Marvels reconfigures the comic book movie format in line with what might be termed an aesthetic of girliness, where the fantasy is less women with perfect bodies than women with clothes that fit right, where a sing-along fantasy prince episode fits in right alongside a cosmic power punch-up, but you know, I'm not the person to pursue that. I am planning to talk a bit about the film and its reception in December's Patreon/YouTube member exclusive, so if you're eager for something, that's probably going to be your best bet. Signing up will also help me get to longer projects like these sooner. I've been wanting to make this for a while, but since there's no guarantee a video like this does well, I can only really justify taking the time to work on longer projects if numbers are good on the channel in the meantime. So you've got the Invincible video's success to thank for this, because before that, numbers hadn't been great for a while. More Patreon or YouTube member signups means less dependence on YouTube ad money, and therefore more time to spend on longer stuff like this. So, if that does sound good, those links are down in the description. A gigantic thank you to everyone supporting these videos at present, especially Hanan, Daniel Goldhorn, Karen Kuhlman, Magath, Ryan Emily, Something Capitalism Bad, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy, and I'll see you all soon.